Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Conservation Happy Hour. We are going to be talking with Krista about her 10 years. I can't believe it's been 10 years. I met Krista back when Polar Bears International was an all-volunteer organization with amazing grassroots support and a broad swath of relationships in the polar bear world. Tons of potential and impressive street cred. Robert and Carolyn Buchanan, who I think are probably joining us today, had gathered an amazing cast of characters who were volunteering their time to bring attention to the plight of polar bears in a warming Arctic. As that snowball continued to grow, we needed someone with the drive and the organizational development experience to capitalize on that work and take it to the next level. So Krista, you were brought on to lead that next phase in the evolution. And I remember when we met, it was probably 2008, 2009, and we were super excited to kind of take it to this next step. And I can't believe it's been 10 years, honestly, but this does mark 10 years since you took the helm. And during that time, Polar Bears International has grown from a small nonprofit with a budget of less than $500,000 to one with projects across the circumpolar Arctic, a global reputation as a leader in polar bear conservation, 31 staff members in 4 countries, the US, Canada, Denmark, and Norway, and a budget of more than $4.5 million. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. I know that many of the folks who've been sort of along for the journey over that time are joining us today, and I'm looking forward to some of their questions as we chat. So we'll go ahead and get started. On your first question really is, why polar bears, and how did you come to work with Polar Bears International?
Well, that's a great question. I had actually quit my job in 2008, and previously for almost 2 decades, I'd been specifically working in conservation, but working with youth and adults and teachers, but really getting people out onto the landscape in nature and connecting with nature for ultimately, to have a conservation ethic. So that's how I got started. I quit my job. I was unemployed. I was getting ready to move to Colorado for just 1 year. And so I knew that I wasn't going to go and take on another another big career move because it was going to be interim. So I was kind of telling people, hey, I have this year, I can volunteer. I'm passionate about a lot of things. I feel like I have a lot of good skills. And I had that conversation with Dan Cox. I was having the conversations with lots of people. So I was picking up other consulting work, other volunteer work, specific to the nonprofit sector. And so Dan said, well, if you have time, we'll take you. Ironically, I was trying to pitch myself to the Owl Research Institute. I was out to dinner with Dan Cox and Denver Holt, and I was trying to tell Denver why I would be such a great volunteer and asset. And he told me he didn't think I was tough enough to work for the Owls. And it was more because of the field work, that can be quite challenging, working with snowy owls up in Barrow. But Dan said that the bears would take me. So ever since, it's been kind of an ongoing joke because I mean, not that the Owl Research Institute still does really great work, but definitely there's been a lot of growth. At the time I've been at PBI. So I think Denver, we give them a hard time about that, Denver Holt. And that's how it got started. And I do blame Dan Cox to this day if I have a bad day at work. I say to him all the time, it's all your fault. I mean, mostly I have really good days, which is great, but it's just kind of an inside joke. So that's how it got started. And I volunteered in 2008 for the whole entire season. I was gone from home, I think it was about 12 weeks. That's when we do these big long stints. Now we don't require people to be there as long. But I hope there are some 2008 leadership camp people on the call because there were so many great cohorts of leadership camp, but that was my first indoctrination to PBI, and what a powerful and impactful group of people to be around. And then I stayed the whole season. I have some really very fond memories of that year. A few of them are, I was told to go pick up Robert out at the Thunder Buggy Lodge with no vehicle, no idea even how to get there, believe it or not. Even though it seems like really simple, there's only one road, but no one had even driven me down the one road. And I'll never forget going over to Hudson Bay Helicopter and asking these total strangers if I could borrow their car. They had no idea who I was, just based upon the principle that they knew Robert and that they were going to do me a favor. And so that was one of my first early experiences kind of in Churchill. My other was warming up batteries on the Cape Churchill Tower. This is for those of you who've watched the Polar Bear Cam or Thunder Connections, that the network up there, 15 years ago, it was a totally different thing than it is today. And I was sent out to the Cape Tower with BJ, who I barely knew, to sit in the tower all day and warm up batteries with a sleeping bag in 0-degree temperatures. So there were 1,000 memorable moments of that first year, but that's how I got connected to PBI, and I've never really looked back. It's been an amazing journey.
Well, I suspect you would have been tough enough for the owl field work. Going through all that, it is sort of trial by fire when we tossed people in church. So I appreciate that. Okay, so you spent a first year as a volunteer. It was tough and a little intense, but it sounds like you really enjoyed it. So you started working on a contract basis after that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so at the time, all of us, myself, we still have those. There are still people working with Polar Bears International today, and with myself, who started as contractors. And that was, it definitely was very creative of Robert and the board. It was that time of, I think the board, I wasn't involved in those very early conversations because I hadn't joined the organization, but this idea of getting people on as small contracts, actually doing work that could be consistent over a period of time with a long-term goal of actually creating positions over time, when the organization could take on the risk of having a salary for a year, or take on the, risk of risk is maybe not the best word, but, telling people, hey,
Responsibility.
permanent, work for you. And so that's how I got started in 2008. And, back then, my other first experience was going to a big planning meeting with Robert and Carolyn. And Amy, you would have likely have been there with a lot of other people that have been very instrumental in making Polar Bears International what it is today. I think there were probably 20 volunteers that met in San Diego later that January or February to really start talking about, growing the organization and, seeing Robert's vision, come to fruition, and how are we going to do that? And so I joined those conversations, and throughout 2009 continued to volunteer, work some contractually, kind of a combination of both. And I was in a great position at that time in my life because I did know that I was going to take this year to volunteer and to, help out where I could to other nonprofit organizations. I ended up doing some things for other organizations as well throughout that year.
So when did we actually start hiring full-time staff, and who were some of those first people?
We were able to hire people in 2010. And actually those were early even. It was still contractual, but it was more on like a regular basis, more of a salary basis. And it was also the time that Robert and the board decided that, maybe PBI also needed a home base. So it was kind of at the same time that we established the office here in Bozeman, Montana. We actually had BJ drive around literally across the United States and pick up PBI's belongings. Because up until this point, it was being totally run by board members and volunteers. And there were things, we had accounting items with Bob Wilson in California, and Barbara had the archives of PBI's history in Louisiana. So, we rented a U-Haul vehicle. BJ drove around the country and picked up people's belongings. We ended up moving to Bozeman, and that's when myself, Barbara, BJ, and Steve all became kind of in that time. And it was kind of an evolution of like, oh yeah, we can manage another salary. We'll move someone from contract to salary. So we did it in a very kind of stepped approach, making sure that we weren't, and Robert really not, but I was part of that admin side of making sure we could make commitments, follow through, and then just adding one staff position at a time, and really professionalizing, the organization to having paid staff, and the rest, then we even got more professional over the years of really what that looks like into attracting and, attracting really talented people and retaining them. So, and all of these people are still with us today, as are a lot of, Amy. I got to know Amy, as you heard, as a volunteer who's now on the staff. So Steve is just, as Barbara and Val Beck said, not stepping down, but stepping up as to our emeritus chief scientist. So still very much engaged. And both Barbara and BJ are on full-time staff here. And I've worked with them ever since 2008.
Wonderful. And for those of you who don't know, Barbara, of course, runs our comms and PR and does a fantastic job. Is an excellent writer. And BJ is on our science team and is the driving force behind most of our technological advancements like BERDAR and den detection technology, as well as Burr on Fur. Many of you probably partner with him on that project. So I think that in and of itself is pretty amazing to have those folks stay on for, over a decade to continue pushing that organization forward.
Yeah. So, it is. And I just have to say, Barbara has been the head of comms. She's taken on many, many more tasks. I think BJ he's probably had like 10 job titles and had a variety of different jobs over the years, which is very different than his job is today. But yeah.
Yeah. And the smaller the organization, the more hats you wear. And it definitely has been evolving. So everybody was still on contract before starting to come on full time. And then 3 years later, you were appointed the executive director when Robert retired. What were some of your early decisions that you remember in that role that you had to make?
Well, first I realized, I was standing on the shoulders of giants. Robert and Carolyn, along with the board, had laid, a very, they had started to build this organization to what it is today and left quite a vision to implement, or continue to implement. But some of the first things that I did, one of the first things was actually hiring Marisa Kraus, who many of you know, because she is our director of programs and oversees all of our relationships with zoos and aquariums. So that was a big one. And then one of the biggest things that I did, and it was very strategic, it was something that I thought about and made sure that PBI could do, was to recruit Jeff York as our senior director of conservation. And I knew it was going to be a big deal because if I went to him about this job, I would be encouraging him to be leaving a very secure environment, working for World Wildlife Fund as the head of their Arctic program. And, I didn't want to do that lightly, but it was probably one of the first and most strategic things that I did. And very happy that I did, because Jeff is still with us today. And I'm very, fortunate to have worked with someone with such amazing, with such an amazing background in polar bears, that added to Steve's background and credibility in polar bears. And it really set the stage, I think, for, helping to make PBI what it is today. And that was big. And kind of going back to Marisa, Robert and Carolyn had already established such this amazing network, the Arctic Ambassador Center network. And so then bringing someone in who could, take what was already there and make sure that it was successful, because there were so many hours put into that initiative, building the network and recruiting different institutions to be part of that network, so hiring someone who was going to be able to, build off of what was already there.
And maintain those relationships and have a point of communication for all of those partners. Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
all right. So, yeah,
I was going to say, and if we reflect back where we are today, so Jeff was Steve was our official scientist, but different, Steve was advising and writing papers where, I hired Jeff to really implement programs for PBI, implement research programs for PBI. And, today we have 10 scientists on staff, from 4 different countries. And I can't even count how many programs that we have or are supporting. So it really put us more in that realm of, being a science and research-based organization as well as a conservation organization. And then following Jeff, I hired Elisa McCall, who is also a scientist. So in those first, from 2013 to 15, those are those 3, main people that I hired, who again are all still with us. And Elisa was our first Canadian. So that was another goal that I had. And I know it wasn't just a goal of mine, but when I came on board, Bob Williams was the chair of PBI Canada and really trying to establish, PBI Canada. And so I felt like in order to do that, we needed more Canadians on our staff. And it's still something, that it's still a goal, and we're still working towards that goal, is having more diverse and international representation on our staff, but definitely specifically Canada.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Climate Alliance and some of our other outreach programs. So we've always had a strong education and outreach focus in addition to the research and science focused side of things. How has that education and outreach piece grown during your time with Polar Bears International?
Well, I was really lucky. I mean, definitely to step into, one, meeting Robert and working for PBI because that was my natural fit. I'd come from, working in small nonprofits. So I was used to wearing 100 different hats. But I also, my background was, science ed and definitely connecting with students and youth, to get them charged and impassioned about the natural world. So that was already an early foundation at Polar Bears International that was very, totally steeped within the culture of the organization and already had tapped into lots of expertise and lots of volunteers. So, my participation has really been about evolving those programs and growing those programs and specifically the Tender Connections, the online distant learning that we do. That was established well before, I started. But after I came on board, we started to kind of formalize that process. We branded the name Tender Connections. Val Beck helped with that, who was a board member at the time and currently is a board member. So we looked at branding that program. We tapped into expert leaders like Julene Reed, who was a distinguished Apple educator and had worked really closely with Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots and Discovery Education. And she continued to open all of these doors that she had already started to open for the organization. So we really now see, an evolution of an already established program, but making it, I guess, a more kind of formalized program. I mean, last year we had over 200,000 viewers in that program, which is really quite remarkable. And we're quite proud of, we're still working really closely with Discovery Ed. We've evolved to having the program have a set schedule that's published way in advance and teachers can sign up. We have downloadable curriculum. We're also connecting with Northern schools, which we're really quite proud of, which isn't so much about the number of students reached, but really reaching students who are living closely with polar bears. So that's been one of the more amazing things. And for those of you who've tuned into those programs, of course, we have an amazing host, which is Elisa McCall, who does such an amazing job of just, hosting the program. So that's been really great. Climate Alliance was another, it was a foundational program, but kind of growing that foundational experience and education. Climate Alliance evolved from the early leadership camp that Robert and Carolyn had started, and with the help of Baltimore Zoo, because Catherine Fote was very a big part of starting the early leadership camp, and then Kathy Myers. So again, these volunteers. Kathy Fote was with Baltimore Zoo, as I mentioned, and Kathy Myers at the time was with San Diego Zoo. And one of the things that we did shortly after Robert retired, and it had nothing to do with the program because the program was outstanding, but there was a lot changing in the environment and the world, was to take a break, a 1-year break from the program and look at how we could integrate more climate science and climate education into the program. And part of it was also realizing that we were bringing people to Churchill, and then we were trying to see polar bears for the first time and do all of these different educational models throughout the week, and that it was just too much, and that we needed to take a step back, think about what we were trying to achieve in that program, and actually make it longer. So now it's a 6-month-long program where we start the training in the spring so we can get a lot of those foundational modules done online with the cohort. And then when people come to Churchill, it's really about experiencing the tundra, the community, getting out on the buggy, seeing the bears, but also connecting with the locals and learning about, local traditions and the flora and fauna, and not just having it be so like drinking out of a fire hose for five days. And ever since that program started, it's really been due to the thanks of Frontiers North Adventures. I mean, they still to this day which they did at the very beginning with Robert and Carolyn, was donating the lodge, the buggy, the infrastructure. And that's part of what makes that program a huge part, a success, because we couldn't do it without them. And here, all these years later, really going into 20 years of supporting that program. And then lastly, the other thing that we've done to kind of expand on that early foundation is the live cams with explore.org, which the first cam was in 2011, I believe. We started talking about it in 2010. We had the first live cam in 2011, and it started with just 3 cams. Now we have over 9 cams. They're not all polar bears. We're turning people on to the northern lights and beluga whales, but those cameras reach 2.5 million people. So, and this really goes back to the heart of what, kind of the heart of PBI, of connecting people to the Arctic, connecting people to the polar bears, connecting people to the ecosystem, and really believing that people are more motivated to care about something when they know and understand it. And so all of these programs just build upon that early foundation, but it is really quite remarkable what the team has done since I've been with Polar Bears International.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's been interesting too to watch a lot of our programs shift from sort of the idea of individual action for polar bears to collective action on climate, and watching that thread evolve. And it's been interesting to see the programs mature. So you mentioned Frontiers North Adventure and the Climate Alliance programs based in Churchill. How I've certainly watched a lot of change in our relationship and our activities in Churchill over the last decade. Can you talk a little bit about how you've watched that change and been instrumental in that change?
Oh, yeah. I was hoping we would find some pictures. I didn't look at all the pictures before, but some of you, you're seeing an old house, the 241 Kelsey Boulevard. Bob Williams, who, again, was the chair of PBI Canada, and now is a former board member that we still keep in touch with. We had a housing crisis. And before, things were again, we probably couldn't have done anything that we did without Frontiers North Adventures, because when I came on board, they were helping us get our housing. They were storing our furniture. We were moving into temporary housing every, September, and then moving out every November. We were crossing our fingers for the other, 9 months out of the year, hoping we got housing the following year. And it was just like, you just kind of never knew what was going to happen. And one year, even though we had put in for housing way in advance and had been calling Manitoba Housing regularly saying, hey, do you have our application? We're counting on these houses. As we were approaching the Churchill season, we were notified we weren't going to get all of our housing. Now, this might not sound like no big deal, but, we had already invited like some 20 people throughout the season, volunteers, to come up to Churchill, and we definitely needed a place for them to, at the very least, sleep, even if it were on a floor. And so we bought this house. Well, Bob Williams bought the house for PBI literally in a day. He charged BJ with going to get the foreclosure list in Churchill, and he bought this property that same day, and we were moving in the next day. And that house was our home from 2010 through 2018, really 2019, when the PBI house was officially done. And now we have this beautiful house, which is also our home, that is not only a place to house people. The upstairs, there are 4 rooms that can sleep 8 people. And we house visiting scientists and visiting educators and people, mostly volunteers, who support and help us reach our mission and do our work in Churchill. And then the bottom is a interpretive center, which I'm extremely proud of, as I know our whole entire staff is, that is open to the public mostly year-round during the height of all of the tourism seasons in Churchill, which aren't just polar bears. They have a fabulous northern light season and a fabulous summer season where you can see the tundra in bloom and beluga whales, and the building is open, to support not only polar bear tourism, but all tourism in Churchill. And so last year we had just over 4,000 visitors. There were over 100 community programs. So those aren't PBI's programs, but the building is open and free of charge for the community as an asset. And so there were 100 community programs at the PBI house. And so that has been a very big game changer. And then we had another big game changer, and where we had a surprise donation from the Mars family, and that's Mars bars and M&Ms and all those yummy treats. They gave us a $2 million donation to build a staff quarters that we call the Mars Arctic Research Center. And that houses our staff and is really the place where we can, host everyone, feed everyone, have staff meetings, do all of our planning, and have real bedrooms for people to sleep in. One of my first memories with Amy was actually sharing a room with her, Dan Cox, Tanya Cox, Megan Owen, Amy Cutting, and myself, having to share a room with no beds. Well, there might have been one or two beds, and we were using Canada Goose coats as our sleeping bags. So a lot has changed, as you can see, because, now in the Mars Center, we have our own rooms. We actually, it's nice, and we're there for a long time. And so it's a place where you can come and be productive, but also feel good about, asking people to, live there for a month or 2 months. And it definitely, both of the buildings, I feel confident in saying this, are, assets to the community of Churchill. And we've tried to share them with not just the things that we're doing, but to have them be really, community oriented as well. So it's just, it's beyond any expectations that I had, for sure.
Well, me, I haven't been up there in a decade, and so my experience maybe a little less than that, but getting up there, it was absolutely mind-blowing to see the transformation of the facilities that are available to do the research, to support the community, to be a real presence and an interpretive asset to so many different people. And like you said, the community meetings, the fact they have, Cree language classes are held there, the kids' activities on school holidays, it's really pretty cool to see how much we've become integrated into that community, which was always the goal, but was tough to do on a seasonal basis. So, and having actual staff in Churchill, it's really tremendous.
The house is really the leading gift came from Danny Reese, he's the CEO of Canada Goose, and he was sitting at our old little house. Brought some really high net worth kind of donors and, asked, what is your vision? And of course, we shared a little bit about the idea of the PBI house, but to see it built and then, followed by the Mars house, I'm truly thankful for, people believing in the organization and helping us achieve this. Both of these.
Well, speaking of Canada Goose, if you don't have a sleeping bag, a Canada Goose, parka is absolutely right up there for what you would want to have to stay comfortable.
Yes. Yeah. No, we've talked to them for a lot. We don't have enough sheets and blankets. They work really great.
All right. Well, so Churchill is, Polar Bears International's first home, and will always, have a special place in our heart. But we've also tried to expand our work into different corners of the world. So what does that look like over the last decade?
Well, I have to, again, give a tip of the hat to Jeff York. We were at a planning meeting, which we still do to this day annually. And this is when PBI was so, quite a bit smaller than it is. So we would bring in outside experts, because you need when you're doing that kind of like strategic thinking or strategic planning, it's good to have a little bit bigger brain trust. And this is when we were quite small. And we were doing a planning meeting. We invited our friends from the Center for Biological Diversity, and I think there were a few people from San Diego Zoo there as well. But Jeff said we really need to put the I in PBI, meaning to make the organization international. And so this set us on a path of really looking critically at how we could do that. And so one of the first ways was expanding our research programs that were in North America. We were supporting research in both Alaska and Canada at the time, but broadening it outside of North America. And so we looked at setting our sights on working with the Norwegian Polar Institute in Svalbard, Norway, which we are currently still doing to this day. We were able to expand some of our programs into Russia, thanks to the leadership of Dr. Eric Regier at the University of Washington. And, unfortunately, we would still be doing that if it weren't for the current state of affairs. And so, and it's still on our sights to maybe do something in Greenland. But currently we have, expanded the research to have it be more circumpolar, hiring international employees who could help us implement some of those programs, and then really growing the education and outreach. Even though it had an international audience, it was like, what are some other things that we can do to increase that international focus of our audience? And so there was additional energy put into developing the Arctic Ambassador Center network in Europe. Robert and I had taken a trip probably the year or two before he retired to Europe. So he definitely had laid a lot of groundwork there. And again, it was taking something that was already, established and really building upon that. So that's, another strategy of making the organization more, global, and specifically, trying to see where we could expand our work in the circumpolar Arctic was really important. And right now we're contemplating, maybe even having some sort of pop-up display in Svalbard. So this idea, I don't think we want to ever duplicate exactly what we've done in Churchill, but there have been some really great, unique opportunities, and we're looking at, what other places could we be working that are similar to working in Churchill without as much, infrastructure, so we could continue to kind of grow,
for sure,
our programs there. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned sort of the laying the groundwork, on a trip to Europe. And one of the things that I think has always been sort of a close held value and has stood out to me about Polar Bears International is that we put this emphasis on building a network of strong personal relationships around the mission, and then amazing things kind of grow from that. So what does that network building, look like for you as the director?
Well, I always say that, really our work is all collaborative. There are no I's. Except for the international part of Polar Bears International. It's not I've done this or even PBI doing it solely. This work is big. It's expansive. It often takes a tremendous amount of expertise in different areas. Like, we have a lot of expertise in biological sciences, but some of the work that we're doing right now is like, you need engineers, and you need other kinds of academic expertise, and you need to be partnering with governments and NGOs and, all of the above. I can't look at any single one of our projects and say, that's all us. We do it all. And I think, PBI is good at doing that. We come with a very collaborative spirit. Amy can attest to that. She has facilitated, I am pretty sure, almost every big workshop that PBI has done long before she started working for Polar Bears International, free of charge, not making any money doing it. But, it really, it does take this collaborative spirit. And I think if more organizations were focused like that, not so much about what do I get out of it and do I own this, but how do you move the needle forward, we would see more collaborations. And it's very much, it's a huge part of PBI's culture, is to work with other people and to tap into other people's expertise. And it's a foundational part of the organization that, I inherited. That value was already very much part of the organization. And we literally couldn't do what we do, whether it's the research partnerships that we have, working with governments and academic institutions or individual researchers, or, I look at the Arctic Ambassador Center network. We have the opportunity to reach millions of people, literally millions of people, to talk to them about polar bear conservation because of our partners with the Arctic Ambassador Center network. If that were PBI going and saying, hey, listen to me, I want to talk about polar bears, we would be talking to not even 1/10 of the people that we're talking to. So I think that model, right, like that a small committed group of people can accomplish a lot, it's because that you're tapping into people and organizations and partnerships that help you, become a bigger machine than you really are. And hopefully in the long run, then become more effective. And, this is a good example of, we can look at education partners, or we can look at, research partners, but we can also look at corporate sponsors. I mean, Canada Goose has been huge in that. Every time they're in the media, they have a sentence at the bottom of their press release that talks about Polar Bears International. They've opened a ton of doors for us. We've been in, Elle magazine or, Vogue, and we can say, oh, that's not really our audience, but it is our audience. Those are the people, we need to be speaking to people outside of the choir, right? And so they've really, beyond being a corporate sponsor who gives us money to support our work, they also have engaged lots of other people from a totally different sector than we might reach. Or, they even really make it a foundational part of their organization to educate their employees. And I don't know exactly how many employees they have, but I think they're one of the larger employers in Canada. So you can see it isn't just about like the research partners or the conservation partners. It's also about the people that support our work, and people like all of you on the call today. Whether you support our work through a donation, or you support our work by being an ambassador or telling people, hey, go check out Polar Bears International. That's why we are where we are today, is that join forces kind of attitude. I'm really I feel fortunate to be surrounded by so many committed and talented individuals and other partnering organizations.
Absolutely. You mentioned my 20-year job interview with Polar Bears International. And I would just say that, I do have to throw out a quick shout out to Oregon Zoo, because they were supporting me and sometimes paying me for some of those activities. So thank you, Oregon Zoo, for being an Arctic Ambassador Center with ABI as well. So you mentioned how proud you are of those partnerships that just constantly help us amplify and extend our reach and get in front of audiences that we wouldn't otherwise. And I completely agree. It was a big part of why I wanted to come on board. But what are, as you reflect, what are some of the other aspects of the organization over the last decade that you're most proud of and inspired by?
That's a good question. When I first came to Polar Bears International, many of the people that we hosted on the Tundra to do the outreach programs were the leading scientists. And how lucky for PBI to be embraced by the Ian Sterlings of the world, or the Andy DeRoches. And then Steve worked for us, and many others, Tom Smith, Marty Obert, the list is long. But one transition I've seen, and it was great having those people, because you have you're hearing from the world's most renowned people. But I think one of the unique or, kind of cool transitions that I've seen is some of those scientists said, hey, let's get the next generation up here. And so we started bringing, grad students and postdocs and, people that were earlier in their career, but still had a certain level of expertise, absolutely, and could talk intelligently about all the subject matters we want to talk about. And so, we really started engaging kind of this young and up and coming group, the next generation of lead scientists. And that's been amazing to watch. And the other thing is a lot of them have been young women, and I think that's not to PBI, that's an evolution within the sciences that we're seeing. And so we're seeing a lot of young, talented people, a lot of women. We've seen definitely something that helps us do our job is funding, increased funding. I think we'll just, we're crunching the numbers now. We don't know until our finished audit, but I think we'll have reached, a goal close to 5 million. And that is from a fairly diversified funding source. And nonprofits need healthy funding from diverse funders. And so that's been really, I'm thankful to each and every, donor and especially to bringing on different, sectors of donors. We've had Steve do multiple landmark papers that, can and are leading to policy changes. Those are things I'd like to see PBI doing more of. And with Amy's leadership and working with Jeff, those are things that we're definitely targeting for the future, is that we do, we're working with the world's leading scientists, whether they're on our staff or we're supporting some of their work or vice versa. And how can we take those papers, that research, and actually make change, like policy change and things that really matter for polar bears. And so that's been exciting. And we have just started our own policy department. So Emily Ringer, who welcomed everyone today, who's been on the staff a long time and has also worn 1,000 hats and had lots of different job titles at Polar Bears International. She's heading up our, a designated policy position, where we're putting more resources into that part of our work. And she's also working on her master's degree in that realm. And so those are other things that I feel, not only good under my tenure, but that we're moving forward in all of those things as well.
When I was thinking about a lot of things in preparing for this call, and one of the things that I was thinking about is that back in the old days, some of us hoped that, and maybe even dared to believe that by highlighting the issues with climate change and fossil fuels, that by now we wouldn't be having this conversation anymore. We would have changed everything and things would be fine and the polar bears would be secure. So I guess if we can kind of start looking at it through a lens of, 10 years into this role, we've done you've seen amazing change in the organization, and you've built you've really helped, like you mentioned, diversify the funding sources and create a robust organization that lives its values, and all that's super exciting. 10 years into this role, and we haven't saved the polar bears yet. What are some things that have changed and that give you hope to kind of keep moving forward in this role?
Well, one of the most visible things, and I mentioned this to some of our team this fall, for those of you who might not have caught it, is we had Good Morning America come up this year with Michael Strahan. And we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of big media over the years. And even my first year in 2008, we worked with some really notable media outlets. But it was really refreshing when we first met with them. And, like climate messaging was going to be in all of their segments, like literally. There was, it wasn't even like hey, if you're going to come and we're going to work with you, that this has to, like, we only want to be working with people who are really talking about the conservation threat to polar bears. And it's like, well, of course, and then it was in every single conversation. Well, in 2008, it was not like that. I mean, maybe a lot of people wanted to come and tell the polar bear story, but then the question was, were they going to talk about the really what's happening, and were they going to make that direct link to what's happening with polar bears, to, climate impacts from the world getting warmer and an ecosystem literally disappearing from the face of the planet? Were they going to bring that as a key message in the conversation? And so that has definitely changed. I mean, and it's a welcome change. And definitely public opinion, getting the opportunity to speak to a lot of people and be in the public. Definitely there's a lot less kind of explaining the why we need to do this. I think people they're seeing it in their everyday lives, so they can make a stronger connection to what they're seeing and experiencing to what might be happening to polar bears. So that's been very much a slow but welcome change. This year in the US, we had our first federal climate legislation. And so even though myself included, we can get frustrated and feel like things are moving too slow, and they are, we need to ramp up the sense of urgency, but it is still good news. And then, the other part that's, it's obvious to me, but it might not seem obvious to everyone. It's the PBI people. I mean, how lucky am I to work in an organization where, all the people that I started first working with are still highly engaged in the organization. And that goes from staff to board members to everyone. And then even having you, Amy, join, right? Officially join the staff, because you've been a highly committed person. And that's true of the donors. I mean, a lot, and the supporters. I mean, a lot of you on the call today, we know you, we've met you. We have a shared passion, not only for the bears, but I think for protecting life for all living things on the planet. And so I think that's a pretty remarkable, I feel fortunate beyond belief that I am with the bears, and, that Polar Bears International, took me under their wing, and, I had the opportunity to work with such an amazing group of people, and then to help, lead the organization into its next evolution, which I think we're also there. We've had this huge growth trajectory the last few years. We're just finishing up our strategic plan. We're going to take one more year to just suck all the juice out of the current plan. But, if I reflect back on when we wrote that plan to where we are today, never in my wildest dreams would I say the staff is 31 people, the budget's $5 million. We have 2 buildings in Churchill. We're working across the circumpolar Arctic. We have 50 Arctic ambassador centers. We reach, 200,000 school kids a year, just all of the things that make working at Polar Bears International a remarkable place. And I do think we're having some really good impacts too. I mean, on the actual conservation of polar bears. So
definitely excited to see what the next 10 years brings. All right, Emily, you probably have some questions you want to pivot to, huh?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what the next 10 years will bring. But just these last 10 are, pretty impressive. Thanks so much, Amy and Krista. It's really fun to reflect on the last 10 years and see some of those pictures, the old PBI house and just the original staff. It's a lot to be really proud of. And definitely, as Krista said, this whole community is part of that, and couldn't be built without everyone on this call. So we do have some nice questions. It's awesome to see so many people tuning in, a lot of familiar names. I did see Kishi Bashi was tuning in, our good friend and musician, and some exciting things coming up with Kishi in the coming weeks. And if everyone on the call hasn't had a chance to listen to his music, would recommend. We did have a great question from Leslie for you, Krista. How international is PBI's membership? And if this isn't, we could also bring on, I know Janet is on here and might be able to speak to this if that would be helpful. So whoever is best, but if you want to take a stab at it, Krista, and pass to Janet if you would like.
Yeah, Janet answer the more nuanced. She's more familiar, but yeah, we have a good, a really strong US and Canadian membership, and then definitely throughout Europe. And this is true, I think, you see the same kind of thing in Churchill. We tend to have, in that the Commonwealth countries, those types of places, we tend to have stronger relationships. But Janet can give you the exact breakdown, of where folks are coming from.
Well, I'll give you as much of an exact breakdown as I can. And I am happy to say that we are seeing support from every corner of the globe. We just did a report last week, pulling a lot of that information, but a vast majority, I would say 65% of that still is within the United States, followed next by Canada, and then also from that international support that comes from Europe, Asia, which is a very interesting growing population of interested supporters, Latin America. I mean, you name it, we have supporters there. So that's a really great question, Leslie.
Yeah, it is. And definitely on the educational front, we're reaching a worldwide audience, which is exciting. When you see like kids tuning in from India or, from like all over the place tuning into the ed programs. It's fabulous.
Yes, thanks, Krista, and thank you so much, Janet. We have another question here from Justin, wanting to know, with the new master planning phase for PBI on the horizon, what is PBI's biggest priority for our collaborations? This is probably good for you, Krista, as our major strategic thinker.
Yeah, and good for Amy, because I think most of the work is going to fall on Amy's plate. No, I'm teasing. There's always, of course, it takes funds to do all this kind of work. So I'm going to focus on more of the work, but in order to do the work, we've got to have support. So that's a big part of the strategy too. But on the work side, definitely kind of two-pronged. One is this coexistence work and supporting communities that are living closely with polar bears on like their terms and what they need. So we're not coming in to be like, here, this is what you should do, but like, where can we support communities that are living with polar bears? Because as polar bears potentially, they are spending more time on land, but even if that's not the driving force, all of us who live in places where there are animals on the landscape and people on the landscape, inevitably there's, there can be conflict, and part of the goal is like, how do you live and coexist? So that's going to be a big part of our work. And that takes all different forms. It's not, it takes a lot of different strategies depending on the individual communities. So that's one big area. And then the other, one of the other big areas, and this pertains to you, Emily, and it's that policy work. So, we know a lot about polar bears. We could learn a lot more about polar bears, but we don't need to know every single thing about polar bears. What do we need to know, or what kinds of things do we need to focus on that actually drive policy change, right? So those are the areas that the two big specific areas that, PBI wants to be working in. And then, of course, it kind of goes along with the coexistence work too, is that, protecting individual bears in a coexistence situation could matter over time. Protecting moms and cubs is going to matter over time. So these are those kind of areas that we're we are focusing on, and we will be focusing on more. But I I'm going to pass it to Amy to see if she wants to say anything more. She might say it more succinctly than I did, possibly. So,
no, I think you nailed two of the three. I think, coexistence is something we talk about a lot, because if we want to see a future that has polar bears in it, we need to make sure that the people who live and work near polar bears are doing so safely, and that we don't have, incidental mortalities of bears either. But really, it's about people being able to live safely in those areas. And they have lots of, as Krista said, lots of different needs that we need to understand on a case-by-case basis, rather than try to tell people what we think they need when we're living safely down here. And the policy piece, but I would also add an advocacy component, which is closely linked to that policy piece. And so whether you're sort of advocating for particular policies, or you're advocating on behalf of communities that need additional resources and tools, or you're giving people tools to advocate for themselves, or to advocate for change in climate, or to advocate for local corporations to change the way that they're doing business. That's a big piece of it too, is trying to get tools into the hands of people who can move the needle on carbon, fossil fuels, right? So those are some very big focus areas for us that you'll be seeing additional information on, and utilizing our partner networks is going to be hugely important in doing that at scale. Great question.
Yeah, excellent answers, both. That alone shows that we have a pretty exciting decade ahead for sure, or just even couple of years, let alone the decade. We have another question here from Brittany. Brittany wants to know, when PBI delivers our educational programs, do we ever work with zoos to facilitate those with kids, or are we always doing those directly through schools? So I'll ask that to you, Krista.
Yes, that's a great question. We have worked with so many zoos, and we love, so we do reach out to the zoos and let them know about the programs that we're doing. But we've hosted a lot of our outreach directly from zoos. I'm sure Amy, when she was at Oregon Zoo, had been involved at least once or twice in us coming to the zoo and then doing outreach from an institution, a zoo, to kids from all over the world. So they've been a huge part in not only providing attendance and encouraging their network of people to participate, but they've also been the hosting institutions of some of our outreach. And we love what we're doing, and we'd love to do more. So if you're working at a zoo, or you have a local zoo and you think this would be a good fit for them, definitely have them reach out to us, and we can share what we're doing, when we're doing it, and the more the merrier. Our goal is not to have it just be a one and done kind of thing. It's not just to come and bring your kids to the, video conference. It's to do a pre-lesson and download the lesson plans, and to attend the video conference, and then maybe do something like within your, to think about what you can do. And kids, actually, as if you have kids, I don't have kids, but I worked with kids. Kids have a lot of influence, over their parents and their communities. So they are part of the change agents too. So yeah, reach out if you want to get involved.
Yes, and I'm sure Amy will be a big part of helping us continuing to facilitate that work, given her excellent background in the zoo community. But yeah, oh, go ahead. Yeah, no.
I gotta add really quick that one of the things that we're learning when we look at the advocacy and policy stuff, one of the things we're learning is that zoos are considered trusted voices in their communities, and in that increasingly polarized world, it's very difficult to find folks that are considered trusted voices. And so if you are a part of a zoo organization, just know that how you are engaging with your community has tremendous value, because you're accessing audiences we don't normally have. They trust the messages that you're putting out. And so I think PBI was really ahead of its time in understanding that potential that zoos have. So your collaboration with us and helping push our messages out is critically important in getting into those communities.
Thanks for that, Amy. This next question, we have one more from Fiona, and then a pretty excellent comment to, I think, end on. So Fiona asks, and this might be for you, Krista or Janet. We might call you in again for this. So Fiona asks, do you find that partnering with firms such as Follow, which are the polar bear tracking bracelets, allow you to engage with new groups that perhaps you don't reach with regular programs? And do you see those groups stay engaged?
Well, Janet can come in just a minute. I do know, because we just did our annual debrief meetings, that, a corporate sponsor like Fallow, they do these great bracelets, wildlife bracelets, and they have a polar bear one. And then you can learn more about polar bears and follow a tracked polar bear through the purchase of a bracelet. They drove more traffic to our website than any outside partner last year. So the answer to your question is yes, yes, and yes. I don't know if we can quantify how, if they stay engaged, but we are seeing engagement. And, people are coming to learn more. And so that's an example of, we have this internal term that we use, and it's just internal, but this idea of a partner, right? So where a corporate partner is more than just a sponsor. They become partners, right? Because they're not just giving you money to do your work, which we value and appreciate money, but it's even better when we can have an organization support our work financially and then join us in that work. And so we need more of those. And that, Fallow's a great example. Canada Goose is a great example. I could, go on with some other ones, but where it isn't just someone writing a check, but they're actually helping to do the education piece. They're helping to do the outreach piece. They're helping to do the advocacy piece. So that's my take on it. And I'll turn it over to Janet if she has anything else to add.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that Krista said about our sponsorships and our partnerships, and growing that community has been really beneficial to Polar Bears International. Some of you may have been familiar with the launch of the electric Mini Cooper. We partnered with them on Earth Day last year, and we rolled out a big campaign over the summer. And I can tell you that from the stats that we've received is that their supporters, the people who are within the Mini community, had visited our website quite a bit, and that they have spent quite a significant time on our website learning more about polar bears. And they have been fabulous, fabulous partners in all that they have done to promote our work and our mission. So I think that those partnerships are very, very valuable to what we do.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Janet. Thanks, Krista. And I think we have wrapped up our questions, but I would like to end with a comment from the founders of PBI, Robert and Carolyn, who are here attending, and you've obviously heard them mentioned multiple times throughout this hour. And Robert said I could share this comment. So he wrote, as a tyrant with the patience of a gnat, I found you, Krista, to be one of the strongest and most tenacious women that we ever met, that clearly was going to fulfill our dreams of having a primarily women-populated organization, which you and your team have fulfilled. All of you remain heroes in life. Thank you so much, which is just an extremely heartfelt and beautiful message to go out on. And I know that we are all so grateful to the foundation that Robert and Carolyn laid with this organization. And I don't, Krista, Amy, do you have anything else to say here?
I just wanted to say thanks. I mean, how fortunate that all of us too, that we do have this connection with founders, with board members. And it goes back to the question about the sponsors. I mean, it's really about this collaborative spirit, this community spirit, right? And that we're all working together to accomplish really a challenging, it's a challenging goal to accomplish, right? But, we're so much more effective when we work collaboratively, and how lucky for PBI to have this long history, one of our big goals is to get all the stories down this next year, because we still have original founding board members, that are working with us. And so I think it does go to the, what we need to see in that greater, broader community of people, really tapping into each other's expertise and playing to our greatest strengths to be effective change agents. And you do that however you can with whatever talents that are around you who are willing to join forces. So, and it takes all kinds of people to do this kind of work. It's not just the scientists that do this work. It takes, the admin people, the educators, the teachers, the zoo professionals, all of the above. So thanks everyone for your commitment to PBI over the last however many years you've been with us. So
yeah, I just want to share my thanks too. I haven't been able to monitor the chat. I've been sort of side-eyeing it, but I haven't been able to monitor the chat. But it'll be fun afterwards to go through and see hellos from all of our old friends. It does feel like a large community of friends and supporters. And I don't know that there's that many nonprofits where you could have a happy hour chat with the director and have people be so interested and have so much fun. It's a fascinating thing that we do, and you guys are all part of it. And I just was really looking forward to it, and it was as much fun as I thought. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you as a regular participant in these chats, Amy. And thanks, Krista and Amy, for the great conversation and for kind of leading us through a retrospective look at the past decade for PBI. And thanks to everyone here for joining us. I mentioned at the beginning that we'll be doing about one of these a quarter. And so you can expect another invite to a conservation happy hour sometime around April-May window, probably in May. And until then, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm sure we'll be connected with all of you. And once again, we're just super grateful to everyone for whatever way it is that you engage in this work. It's the most important thing that we're all doing it in our own super unique way, because it is a bunch of interwoven threads making one blanket of this work. So thank you for what you do, and we hope you're well and stay in touch.